Hey there, guys. How's it going? I'm Corey. This is the How to Adult Show. Episodes come out every Monday where we talk about every basic personal finance lesson that you could possibly need to build a happy, free, and financially secure life that you actually enjoy. Chances are, if you've ever found yourself asking, why didn't anybody teach me this stuff in school, then you can find that lesson covered on the How to Adult Show. Now, today's lesson is going to go back to one of my age-old favorite topics because it is so incredibly important, and that, of course, is emergency funds. In case you're not familiar with the concept of emergency funds, also known as FU funds or freedom funds, we have loads of emergency fund lessons which I've linked down in the description for this episode. To give you a quick précis though, an emergency fund is an account where you ideally have saved 3 to 6 months worth of your necessary living expenses, preferably more even if you're self-employed or have low job security. Your emergency fund is the bank account that you can dip into if the proverbial brown stuff hits the rotating ceiling appendage. This is YouTube, I can't swear. But otherwise, it is not to be spent on anything else, and it's different from your regular savings accounts or your retirement savings accounts. You should have this emergency fund saved in a separate bank account where you're not tempted to touch it, and preferably to have it in a high interest savings account while you're at it so that it's at least earning a little bit of money for you as time goes by. Now, today's episode specifically is going to be talking about how long it takes to save an emergency fund, because I know a lot of you are out there looking at your finances or lack thereof and feeling like an emergency fund is just a luxury item for wealthy people because it's going to take you so long to save up that amount of money. You feel like you're never going to get there. And while absolutely everybody can and should have an emergency fund, saving one does take time and diligence and a lot of effort. It's easy to think that someone else just snapped their fingers and pulled their money out of another account and was able to put aside this volume of money into their own emergency fund, but that's just not the case for most people. It takes time and a fairly long commitment, so to make this easier, because we all like to have a goal or an end date to work towards, I'm going to walk you through reasonably how long it could take to fully fund your own emergency savings fund. In today's episode, we are also going to cover just a few quick ways and ideas that you can use to fill up your emergency fund more quickly, as well as the difference between saving for your emergency fund and saving for your retirement, because I find this is something that people often blend together, and it is extremely important to keep them separate for reasons which I will explain. Before we dive in, though, I want to say a quick hello and welcome to the How to Adult Show. I'm your host, Corey Fowler, and this is your source for all the important adulting life skills, like personal finance, that you wish someone had just taught you in school. So make sure you hit subscribe, and let's get started. If you are the type of kid who always asked, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" then this episode is going to help you. And let's be honest, I think we're all guilty of asking, "Are we there yet?" sometimes, because we like to be able to see what it is we're working towards. We like to know where we're going and how long it's going to take to get there. So naturally, when I teach about emergency funds, the question that everybody has is, how long is it going to take me to save my emergency fund? And the true, honest to goodness answer to this question is that it depends. It varies for everybody. And how long this takes is really going to depend on factors like how high your necessary living expenses actually are, what your income is, and how much you can cut back on your discretionary spending temporarily so that you can divert some of those savings over into your emergency fund. So, annoyingly vague answer, I know. I have more for you though, I promise. Some people can fill their fund up in a few months, while it's not uncommon for other people to need a few years to fill their emergency accounts. Instead of focusing on how long this is going to take you, focus instead on finding every possible area where you can save money to fill your fund up faster so that you won't have to be working towards this specific goal for quite as long. To give you a real life example, when I first started my emergency fund, I was in my early 20s and I just started my first business. Now, As I'm sure you know, starting a business can be risky, and I had a huge fire under my butt to get my emergency fund filled as quickly as possible so that I could create some semblance of job security for myself as an entrepreneur. My goal personally was to save 12 months of necessary living expenses because I felt that my job security was low running my own business, and I knew that I personally needed a larger emergency fund in order to feel comfortable. I started my fund and deposited a nice little chunk of money into it right away to get it started, but saving up to a full year's worth of expenses is a lot of money to save, and it took me almost 2 years to get that account to where I wanted it to be. And that was 2 years of extreme diligence and contributing consistently to my fund to reach my goals, which is a long time, and absolutely that's a realistic time frame. So don't expect it to magically happen overnight. Trust the process and trust that the feeling of security you're going to get from having this fund is going to be so very worth the dollars and cents that you've saved to build it in the first place. Having done this myself, the biggest tip that I can give you is don't allow yourself to get frustrated by and give up on things that take a long-term commitment. Everyone romanticizes the goal but dreads the execution, so you need to keep a laser focus on that goal of filling up your emergency fund and get in the habit of just weighing every unnecessary purchase against that amazing feeling that you're going to get from having built that safety net for yourself. Moving on to the part that I'm sure you're all waiting for, how to fill your fund up faster. So it does take most people a while to get their emergency funds to the level that they want them to be at. That being said, there are a few things you can do to save a lot of money faster. Now, I created an entire lesson around this exact concept a few months ago called 10 Ways to Save Your Emergency Fund Up Faster. So if you're looking for some money saving ideas, I'll link that episode in the description as well so you can go take a look at it and get some ideas after this episode. The idea behind this, though, is that filling up your emergency fund faster takes making some temporary spending sacrifices that have the distinct end date, that part's important, of when your fund is filled up. It's so much easier to sacrifice some of your daily spending luxuries when you know that it's for a short period of time to reach your end goal. And honestly, it's so worth making these sacrifices for a few months because when you're done, you'll find that it really changes your whole relationship with money from one of fear and anxiety and lack to feeling like you've got this and you've got things under control and you can handle whatever life decides to throw your way. So if this sounds like a good plan to you, I do recommend checking out that episode that I just mentioned for a list of 10 great savings ideas. But I want to give you a quick example here of a great temporary sacrifice you can make to create a long-term gain. So if you're trying to fill up your emergency fund and you have the luxury of continuing to live at home for a little bit longer or to move back home for a few months or to live with roommates, I absolutely recommend that you do that and save yourself, quite literally in a lot of cases, thousands of dollars worth of rent money. If you're putting each month's worth of saved rent towards your emergency fund, you'll be able to fill that thing up really darn quickly. And then when you move into your own place, you can feel so much more secure there, knowing that if something happens like losing your job, you're not also going to lose your apartment the very next month. And this is a really good example of how making that temporary sacrifice of living at home or with roommates for a while longer gives you the long-term gain of having security in your living situation because of your emergency fund safety nest. And now we move on to saving an emergency fund versus saving a retirement fund. Saving up your emergency fund is one of your top financial priorities. This means that it should come before almost everything else other than paying your living expenses and keeping up with any debt payments that you might have. People often get confused about whether they should be saving an emergency fund or just saving to invest for their future. And I want to clarify that having an investment portfolio is not the same as having an emergency fund. Tons of people ask me this if they can just draw from their investments if they have an emergency. And these need to be two completely separate accounts, and I'm going to use a very recent example to demonstrate why. Think back to March 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic first started, and almost overnight, parts of the world shut down, tons of people lost their jobs overnight, and the stock market took a huge plunge. Now, even if you were lucky through this time and your work situation didn't change, imagine if you had been one of the people who had lost their jobs. Suddenly, you would find yourself needing to dig into your emergency fund, which is what it's there for. But if you'd been keeping it invested, then you would have lost a lot of your emergency fund in that crash that happened at the same time as when you lost your job. And that would have been really incredibly stressful. Suddenly, this emergency fund that you had been counting on would have had only a fraction of the money in it that you needed anymore. Whereas if you'd kept that fund in a high interest savings account, none of it would have gone anywhere when you lost your job, and it all would have been available for you during the time when you needed it most. So please make sure that you keep this separate from your investment accounts. I'm going to say that again. Never ever invest your emergency fund. Keep that cash liquid so that you can take it out anytime you need it. And people often push back against this and say, but then my money isn't growing. It's not going to keep up with inflation. What good is cash going to do just sitting there in a bank account? But remember, this fund is not your growth money. That should be a separate account. You should have that as well. But your emergency fund is your safety money. It's your net. It's what's going to catch you when you fall, because not a lot else will. And as we just discussed, it probably took you a long time to save up the money in this account. So you never want to put yourself in a position where you could watch 30% of it vanish overnight. That would be heartbreaking, and it's not fair to yourself. And honestly, the risk to your financial security here is not worth the relatively small amount of growth that you could get from just a few months worth of living expenses. Just put it into a high interest savings account. The one that I use offers a 1.25% return, and just accept that that's your growth. It's not going to keep up with inflation, but that's okay because it's safe. So hopefully this episode helps you create some more reasonable expectations for yourself around how long it's going to take to fill up your emergency fund. It's completely okay and completely normal if it takes a really long time to get it to the level that you want it to be at. Like I said, mine took 2 years and I'm constantly adding to it still. So just commit to it, stick with it, and I promise the feeling of freedom that you're going to have once you're finished is going to be so worth every penny that you've pinched over the last few months or years to get there. So if you're inspired to get started on your emergency fund, then make plans to get started today. I've included a link to the high interest savings account that I use for my emergency fund in the description. So if you are located in Canada like I am, then I recommend opening one of those accounts today and starting to fill your fund up right away while you're still feeling motivated. And then, this part's always important but overlooked, once you reach your goal, celebrate it. I want people to celebrate creating financial security for themselves. This is so important. This should be a huge milestone in people's lives that we celebrate. So celebrate it yourself. Make sure you send me a message or a comment on social media letting us know when you've hit your goal and you have a fully funded emergency account, and we are going to be there to cheer you on for it as well. And lastly, before I sign off, if you like the sound of this whole emergency fund idea and think, like I do, that this is something that everyone should have, then consider sharing this episode with a friend. I would appreciate it so much. They would probably appreciate it. It's just all good things. Also, if you want to learn more, I have tons of other episodes on this topic, all of which are linked in the description for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. You're the best. Peace and love, guys. See you next week.